सेव किया था ना?
मैं सिर्फ इसलिए गया था क्योंकि उसने मुझे कॉल किया. That's it. But listen though.
Save it for someone else.
जिंदगी में सेव करना जरूरी है, मगर जब बात पैसों की हो, सिर्फ सेविंग से काम नहीं चलेगा. इक्विटी म्यूचुअल फंड्स में इन्वेस्ट कीजिए और अपने सेविंग्स को आगे बढ़ने का मौका दीजिए.
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
I'm with Swapan Dasgupta of the Bharatiya Janata Party, a former member of parliament, a former journalist, a well-known former journalist, also somebody who knows the UK very well, having lived there for some years. He knows the India-UK relationship especially well. And John Elliott, a former Financial Times correspondent, editor, chief of bureau in New Delhi, lived in India for several years and now writes a very well written blog called Riding the Elephant on WordPress. And we will share the link with you, so those of you who want to read it. And today, of course, we're talking about Rishi Sunak, the British, Hindu, Indian, African Prime Minister of the UK. That's a bit of a mouthful, but I have both Swapan Dasgupta and John Elliott to tell us what this means. First man of color, practicing Hindu. We have a lot of information about Rishi Sunak. But what does his elevation to the top job in the UK mean for India? But first of all, let me welcome both you gentlemen to the Print Debates. Welcome.
Hello.
Swapan, can I start with you first? What does the elevation of Rishi Sunak, a practicing Hindu British citizen, mean for India?
Well, firstly, let's get one thing clear. Rishi Sunak wasn't made prime minister because he was a practicing Hindu. He wasn't made prime minister because he was a person of Asian descent, of Indian descent. He was made prime minister partly because in a moment of intense crisis for Britain, the parliamentary party of the Conservative Party, the parliamentary party of the Conservatives, deemed that he was probably the man most appropriate to bring a degree of stability and a measure of reassurance to the country. And he had the certain technical competence to be able to do it. And it was also felt that he was not a polarizing figure.
So then why is India getting so excited with Rishi Sunak?
There's nothing, there's a certain importance of symbolism. Yes. And I think, every country looks at any event from its own perspective. Mm-hmm. And it's understandable, therefore, that a person like Rishi Sunak wasn't disqualified on the strength that he was a person of color. This would have been unimaginable 50 years ago, because there were hardly any members of parliament who were sort of non-white. So a person, Sunak had competence, but what he also stood, his identity, his nominal ethnic identity didn't count as a disqualification. And I think
you disagree with your own party, but Swapan, that means
there's no such thing as a party line on this.
Okay.
Hang on. We are not a communist party. There's no such thing as a party line. There are individuals who have different perspectives.
Because Vijay Chathaiwale, the head of the BJP Foreign Affairs cell, has brought in Sonia Gandhi's origin, the Italy-born Sonia Gandhi, who refused to become a citizen for several years, and Rishi Sunak
Rishi Sunak was born in Southampton. Rishi Sunak had his entire upbringing, education, everything almost in the United Kingdom. He's as Brit as they come. That he looks.
Absolutely.
He looks an Indian. That doesn't necessarily make him an Indian. He has a certain inheritance, ancestry, etc. And we are very proud of that fact that, a person
right.
who we can call our own has also made it to Downing Street. It's a phenomenal achievement. But let's not get it wrong. Rishi Sunak isn't there because he's an Indian. I guess he's more likely to be there because he got into the inner councils because he was a school captain in Winchester and he went into the right sort of college in Oxford. and had a certain experience with the city and with the world of finance. So those are the things which mattered to him. In any case, he represents a constituency
Right.
in Yorkshire, which is as rural as they come, which is, well, it can be called Middle England in some ways or the other. But it has, I don't think it has more than a sprinkling of a couple of Indian restaurants, but nothing to
Okay,
write
I'm
home
going to
about
bring,
as an-
yeah, I'm going to bring
So
John Elliott.
let's keep that in mind. And I think the problem is if we keep going on and on about Rishi Sunak being a Hindu and things like that, it's going to also make him defensive in some ways. About being when it comes to Indo-British relations, we want him to act in the best interests of Britain, not bat for India, because that's not what he's there for. He's there to bat for Britain.
That's right. John, can I ask you, you just heard Swapan Dasgupta saying that India shouldn't get too excited about the elevation of a practicing Hindu to the top job in the UK. What do you think?
Well, I suppose, obviously, people in India will celebrate just like they celebrated Kamala Harris becoming the vice president in America before she became less effective than people hoped she would be. So naturally, everybody is excited. I mean, I lived in India, as you know, for 25 years or so, and I'm used to India loving being lauded abroad in whatever sense that may be, whether President Biden or President Trump says something favorable or whatever. India loves being lauded abroad. So it'll be seen partly like that in India. But for Britain, picking up what Swapan's just said, one of my sons, and I quoted him in my blog this morning, I don't often quote, in fact, I've never quoted any family in my blog before. He's in his mid-40s, and he said, just off the cuff, let's see what an intelligent, young, multicultural, economics fluent leader can do for us. And that's, speaking for him, that's somebody who's probably exasperated with Boris Johnson, who he once thought was okay, totally exasperated like everybody else was with Liz Truss, who totally overstated what she thought she could achieve, and is hoping for sane, sensible government, prime minister, who will lead the country into sound policies without all the baggage of having been in politics a long time. He only became an MP in 2015. But it's interesting, I was looking back to some old cuttings online yesterday, and David Cameron, apparently, who was then Prime Minister, spotted him very early on after 2015 and said to somebody, there's a future Prime Minister, I reckon.
Well, he said it in a stadium full of people in Ahmedabad in India, where he said, I'm sure that Rishi Sunak will one day be the Prime Minister of England. So there you are.
Oh, it was there, was it? Okay. Yeah. And since then, Sunak has risen and was a very competent finance minister, Chancellor of the Exchequer, as it's called. And now, when I watched him in the hustings, I felt I was watching a sound manager, senior executive, who knew how to get things done. Present him with a practical problem, and he will address it. Say you haven't got enough hospitals, the schools aren't working properly, the power energy system isn't working, and he will apply his mind to that as a practical problem. And I think on all those things, he will be excellent. But what he doesn't have is any experience at all in international relations, in diplomacy, in national security.
Okay, I'm going to come to that, John, and I'm going to interrupt you, but I do want to ask the race and class question. I know that Swapan and you both feel that this is being a bit overdone, but Swapan, India is in its 75th year of independence from the British Raj, and there is a lot of rhetoric in the Indian media about how the empire is striking back, and it's Rishi Raj, a headline in the Times of India, that this is the best Diwali that certainly a best Diwali for Rishi Sunak himself, but also for both countries. What do you make of this feeling that there is in India of the empire, striking back on its old master?
No, I don't attach too much. I mean, this is not a retribution of history. I think what is quite clear is that the Indian diaspora and there's a formidable Indian diaspora all over, is now coming into its own. It's getting places. And there was an image of India, which I remember very well in the mid-70s in the United Kingdom, which was Indians were basically bus conductors, toilet cleaners, and people who just got kicked around a bit. From there to move on to the place of where Indians are sort of dominating or have a very important position in the city, whose per capita income is almost comparable, if not marginally, just nominally below that of the Jewish community. You've traveled, and who succeed very well in schools. I mean, there are always the Indian overachievers in schools and universities. So there's a different perception of the Indians which is coming through. And Rishi Sunak should be fitted into that sort of perception. I mean, he fits into that mold altogether. And it's very much there in the United States. But immigration into Britain was of a very different character. Yes, thanks to Uganda and Kenya, we had a community of Gujaratis who knew how to handle money. And they proved remarkably successful in being sort of small entrepreneurs in Britain. And they did, despite a lot of institutional obstacles which they confronted. So
large community of Punjabis.
Overall, I think it's also a testimony to the manner in which the British Indian community has gone places. And I think it's also a testimony to the changing attitudes of the host society. And I think we shouldn't underestimate that. You know, I think it's always very tempting to do this sort of bit of empire bashing and therefore but Britain of today is a very, very different place from what the Britain of even from the 1970s was.
So Swapan, you agree with Shashi Tharoor, the Congress MP, who says that perhaps, that things have changed so much in Britain and that they've got a man of color as the most powerful man in their country. But could you do this in India?
Of course you can do this in India. We've always done it in India. You see, in India, we have a different form. You see, there exists certain divisions in Britain still. Color may not be the...
But how do you do this in India? Your own party is disparaging of...
Look, I'm not getting into this question about why Muslims aren't there in the BJP. The Muslims are the only way to get a Muslim elected in the BJP is to put him or her in a constituency which doesn't have Muslims. And principally a Hindu constituency. If APJ Abdul Kalam, had he been hypothetically speaking, a BJP candidate, should have been put up in Uttar Pradesh, somewhere in, where the Muslim community is not a factor. Because people weren't going to be voting for him as a Muslim.
No, it's not just about Muslims, Swapan. It's also about your own party colleagues. Amit Malviya has been very disparaging about Sonia Gandhi. I mean, she's been...
You can be disparaging about Sonia Gandhi politically. I'm very disparaging about Sonia Gandhi.
No, they're talking about her ancestry, the fact that she was Italy born. I mean, they're being very disparaging about her, considering she's been an Indian citizen for decades. I mean, that's kind of uncalled for, isn't it?
Sonia Gandhi has every constitutional right to be anywhere. There is no constitutional bar on Sonia Gandhi occupying the highest position if it is there. And neither is there any constitutional bar for me saying that I don't believe that Sonia Gandhi should occupy that position. And I don't think that makes me a racist. I don't think that makes me a xenophobe in any particular way. Just as I feel, nobody had any, people may have attacked Manmohan Singh for being a weak prime minister, but that wasn't an attack on the Sikh community.
No, that's not the point. I think the point...
That is the point.
No, the point is...
I don't think the point is that there is an experience of Britain, there is an experience of India, and I don't think we should put those two on par. Today, Indian politics, for example, has, for instance, transcended a lot of the class barriers which existed. One of the ways in which India has really expanded when we talk about inclusiveness. One of the ways in which we've done so is hitherto marginalized communities, people who were disadvantaged on the strength of their family background, etc., who came from humble origins, today have the opportunity of getting there. This is more in India and less so in Britain. Let me add that. Britain, class matters. I mean, I probably have a greater chance of succeeding in Britain than a white person from inner city neighborhood.
That's an admission, Swapan.
Yeah,
why did you say that?
Yeah, because in Britain, what matters is how you speak. The moment you open your mouth, people can identify you. And I tell you, Britain is a very class-ridden society.
So, John,
that's one of its problems or some of its quaint eccentricities. I don't know what I call it, but it amuses me no end. And I mean, that's the reality. And Rishi Sunak fits in. He fits in anyway. He's as good in the Carlton Club as he's good in the city. So just because the Conservative, I mean, even a descendant of Lord Salisbury is likely to welcome him. So,
John, I don't know. Your video's been going on and off. You're in a park in Madhya Pradesh, in Kana, actually, and it all looks very beautiful. So I don't know how much of what you caught on of Swapan Dasgupta's.
No, I was fascinated by all that. Yes.
So what do you think?
I was reminded.
I'm really interested in hearing your thoughts about the whole empire question. With Indian journalists and the Indian media saying that the empire is striking back. Is this resonating in Britain at all?
I mean, there's an awful lot of jokes going around about white people running brown people and white people blaming brown people for all their problems, which we can now do if Rishi gets it wrong. Oh, well, and there will no doubt be opposition to him around the country, especially in the upmarket rural areas, supporters of the Conservative Party, the old-fashioned people in the shires who won't like the idea. How much all this actually matters in practice, I think we'll see when he hits hard times. Mm-hmm. I think for the moment he's going to have, as all prime ministers do, although Liz Truss only had it for about 24 hours, is a honeymoon period while he can get on with trying to run the country. And he's surrounded himself with a pretty sound cabinet balancing all the interests. And I think the colour side of it will recede after 24 hours or 48 hours of jokes until things go wrong. And when he hits tough times, let's then see what sort of undercurrents there are and what sort of remarks on Twitter. I mean, certainly coloured people people of colour do get criticised in Britain. There are yobbos who will make trouble on streets for people. It's by the fact we have a brown prime minister does not mean that it's all gone and we'll all accept everybody. We don't. The country doesn't. But I think, going back to what my son said, that he is seen as a technocrat, a sound, sensible guy who knows how the world works. He doesn't know how politics works, but he knows how the world works. He's respected around the world as somebody who will get on with the job. Mm-hmm. And that, I think, pushes colour into the background for now. And let's hope it continues.
Yeah. Well, I just pick up from where John left. And I think, some years ago, there was a British journalist called David Goodhart who wrote this fascinating book where he characterized two types of political people. He said the anywhere man and the somewhere man. And I think the somewhere man are those politicians who are very rooted to a certain political culture, who represent constituencies, etc. And the anywhere man, which is really what Rishi Sunak is an extreme cosmopolitan. Some people call him the Davos man. These are the sort of terms.
That's a real insult.
Yeah. But Rishi, in a sense, has been a technocrat. And at present, this was almost like choosing a wartime leader. So they needed a technocrat at this point. Someone who can fix the economy, bring it.
Manmohan Singh type, would you say, Swapan?
Absolutely. I think that an analogy is perfect. And And the point really comes in when an election is due. And that's what a lot of conservatives actually they were tempted towards Boris, because they said, yes, I know Boris is a bit of a clown. Boris can mess things up. Boris has messed things up. But there is no better campaigner than Boris. And I think one of the reasons why Boris stepped down and he didn't contest was because he realized that at present, what you need is someone who can fix the economy. And he realized that was probably beyond his competence at this level. So,
Right.
so we must keep Sunak, Rishi's own sort of competence, his strengths, and his liabilities in perspective. And he also, he's going to be tested. I think John is absolutely right.
Yeah, John?
I think the analogy with Manmohan Singh is a bit overstrong. When he became a finance minister in 1991 for the reforms, and then when he became prime minister later, he'd had a lot of experience, and he was a revered character. I mean, he was a revered senior public figure. Rishi is not that. Rishi is seen as an ex-Goldman Sachs hedge fund guy from America who's come to Britain. In fact, I think that America link is almost as important as the India link, who's come as a technocrat and has been chosen to try and do a job. But I think Manmohan Singh is overstretching it a bit.
So, John, let me ask you about the new home.
I just also add one more thing. That I think one of the things which is held against Rishi, certainly by the media in Britain, is that he married an heiress. And I think
we'll talk about Rishi Sunak's wife, Akshata Murthy, who's the daughter of the Infosys.
Yeah, I mean, he married her, and and it's sort of somehow held in some way that, as if he's committed a grave crime in some way.
Yeah.
And for heaven's sake, half the British aristocrats of yesteryear were all married to American heiresses.
Okay, since we are on the Akshata Murthy question, John, I mean, why is Britain so upset about the fact that Rishi Sunak, a man of independent wealth, independent means, has married this rich woman who's Narayan Murthy's daughter? I mean, he's allowed to marry who he wants to.
Yeah, that leads me on to something else, which is that and I'm going to go in 10 seconds. I'll go back to the precise point. Rishi Sunak has showed over all his personal things a total lack of political judgment. It showed how inexperienced he was at managing himself as a public figure. He did not cancel his green card, which he got when he worked for Goldman Sachs and for a hedge fund in America. Soon after 2015, when he became an MP, he should have sorted out his personal baggage so that it didn't catch up with him just when he was trying to become the leader, which he was in the summer. He didn't cancel his green card. He didn't sort out his wife's tax advantages, which he was perfectly allowed permissible, where she saved some £20 million in tax that she didn't pay. Totally legal, but not sensible for a politician. And then he went and talked about how his family had 5 different sorts of loaves of bread in the house, but according to which one, what each of the member of the family wanted, when other people in Britain couldn't even afford 1 loaf. He was building a huge swimming pool in his mansion in Yorkshire. It's a lovely, I think, Georgian country house, which I wish I owned. I would just like to own a quarter of it. And there was some resentment when he first became an MP, and I know this personally through friends. There was some resentment in Yorkshire when he first became an MP up there, that he went off and bought this lovely country house instead of a sensible townhouse in the middle of Northallerton or wherever the headquarters of the constituency is. So he has shown. Oh, and then he wore expensive shoes, costing £350 and a £3,000 suit. So throughout, he has not shown much political savvy on how to behave. But he is a fast learner. I think he's probably learnt all that. And then along with his wife, I mean, she's a lovely lady, I'm sure. I haven't met her, but I know her dad. If you want to be a politician, it's not sensible to marry somebody who's going to bring in £600 million into your bank account, which will then go public. So it's in a way it became more controversial. It was easier to talk about that than was his colour. His colour was hardly ever mentioned in the summer. in public and in articles, because people just focused on these other points. Those other points are solvable, of course.
I think John has a point, Chopin, doesn't he? That if he wants to be, he's clearly ambitious, and that's a good thing, but then he should have understood what Akshata Murthy's inheritance meant for his politics. And then, this whole non-dom and non-domicile business, that she's an Indian citizen and therefore doesn't need to pay tax. I mean, that's hardly clever, is it?
No, it's not. It wasn't clever. And I think it just tells you that I don't think Rishi Sunak ever imagined that he was going to get to the top of the political pile. I don't think that was in his calculation at all. And I thought it would be, he probably imagined it would be a steadier, more gradual ascent to prominence, and whereby he could have sorted it out. But of course, he had to sort it out overnight. Hopefully what he should be thinking about is that these will soon be forgotten.
So Boris Johnson must be gnashing his teeth, do you think?
Well, Boris is responsible for his own downfall.
John,
I don't think any, the manner in which he acted really like a spoiled brat during the COVID thing was really what caused his downfall. It's, in hindsight, these are not grave offenses, but in the context of when it happened, they come out as a person who's perhaps laughing at the rest of the population. And that is really what did Boris, that was Boris's undoing. I still feel he's an enormously talented politician, a man whose way with words is spectacular. He's genuinely funny. And I think he has a certain degree of flexibility, which, he's not doctrinaire. He has a certain measure of flexibility. But for the moment, I await Boris's next book.
John,
the only thing he's doctrinaire on, that Boris is doctrinaire on, is that he doesn't need to abide by the rules that everybody else has to abide by.
Exactly.
That's his only doctrine. And his downfall, although everybody focuses on whether he was holding a glass of beer or champagne or whatever in his hand during the Downing Street parties and all that, his actual downfall was because it was believed that he had lied to the House of Commons and that he had told fibs continuously over whether he was at these parties and whether they broke the rules. There's still a privilege committee to rule on that. Inquiries are just starting. And that's one of the problems. If he had continued and become Prime Minister yesterday or this week, that was going to come up. He would have still been under attack and vulnerable because of the way he behaved. But his only doctrine is himself and how he can manage his rise from school onwards without abiding by the rules that everybody else abides by. And eventually it caught him out, and long may it do so.
But wasn't Rishi Sunak at least one of those parties?
I understand. So.
Wasn't he? Yes, he was. Yes, he was. And he could well be criticised for that, but he has not stood up in the House of Commons and said, I didn't think it was a party.
Okay,
and that's what Boris.
John, let me ask you the Suella Braverman question. The woman, again of Indian origin, but I suppose once removed, has been in the hot spot these last few weeks when she was in previous Prime Minister Liz Truss's cabinet for her remarks on Indian visa holders, and she said that Indians sort of stay on the most amongst all those who get visas to come to Britain. But that's just one of the things that she said. She's back as Home Secretary. How do you think that she is going to be in her new job?
Well, I think it's a disaster to have her as Home Secretary. But for Rishi Sunak, I think it was essential that she was brought into the cabinet, and she probably insisted on having that job. She played a key role over the weekend when she came out publicly in favour of him becoming Prime Minister. And that is widely seen in Britain as tipping the balance for right-wing MPs to back Rishi, and also for Boris backing off on Sunday night when he suddenly decided that enough was enough. He wasn't going to stand. I think it was 9 o'clock in the evening. And that was because she had brought the right wing with her. So she had to be rewarded. I mean, it's just like in India. I mean, the politics are very similar. You have to reward the people who help you come to power, which is why you don't always get the ideal people in the jobs that they ought to be doing. I think she's a disaster. To put it simply, she has been trying to stop future immigrants gaining the advantages that her parents had, which have enabled them to bring her up and project her into education and everything else. So she becomes the Home Secretary. She's denying to people of her own origin, family's origin, the privileges that her parents enjoyed. And that, to me and many other people, is unforgivable. She may have a strong policy on immigration, and probably a strong policy on immigration is needed, but you can manage it more equitably than she has. And fell out with Truss over the weekend while all this was going on, because she was pushing her tough line on immigration, which helped to scupper to delay the India trade deal. And I suspect that Jeremy Hunt, the new finance minister, Chancellor of the Exchequer, who was trying to bring some balance into the cabinet, was objecting to her taking such a strong line. And now she's back. She was sacked, not actually for a strong immigration line, but because she broke some rules, parliamentary rules over passing documents on to MPs. Right. And that was a technicality which she deserved to be sacked for. And there is a lot of criticism in Britain today that she should not have been reappointed after having been sacked for that. So there are 2 points. One is the technical point that she was sacked for, and the criticism is that she's been brought back despite having done that. My point is different, which is that she's a danger because she's so hard right-wing. She will encourage strong action. We haven't got onto this yet. One of Sunak's main problems is going to be the risk of widespread industrial action this winter over pay claims. We've got the railways on strike already for various days, and she will be pushing for a hard line and for restricting the right of workers to strike and to demonstrate and to picket. And she's, in my view, a danger on that, because she could help to lead to a winter of severe disruption for the government, which will upset the attempts to restore the economy to some sort of stable footing.
So, Swapan, the immigration question to you, I mean, isn't it strange? It's a bit like the third-class compartment situation, isn't it? That you get into the third-class compartment on the train, but then other people who want to get in, you sort of don't let them. Similarly, with Suella Braverman, the new Home Secretary, she's of, again, Indian origin, came to Britain, her parents came to Britain, now enjoying all the privileges of living in that country, but doesn't want potential immigrants to come in. In fact, they want to send them to Rwanda. So what kind of...
I think we've got to be very clear about this immigration question. I think immigration, or longer term immigration of unskilled labor is not acceptable in Britain any longer. I think they may do it for seasonally, for picking strawberries or something like that, but it's by and large, it's out. When we talk about immigration, we're not talking as in the 50s and 60s of entire ships coming in or an entire plane loads of immigrants coming in. We're talking about very, very specific skill sets coming into this country, into the United Kingdom, and those skill sets now happen to be. There might be some Americans, but more or less there's some Chinese, there's some Indians. It's a whole host of people who come in, but they are well-paid people. In fact, the threshold which they specify for potential immigrants is quite high in terms of income. So they are not going to be a burden on society in any way. In fact, they're going to enhance Britain's economic competitiveness. If you're an open market society, then you need people like that. Just like in India, we will probably have to have a far more generous policy of skilled immigration in the coming days. So we must keep the question of immigration in perspective. Now, the question of overstayers, it's an issue which was first flagged off by Theresa May when she was Home Secretary, and Saad, it sort of vitiated the mood for the FTA in initial rounds of the FTA negotiations. I fear it could once again play that same role in the last stages, and it will require a sort of a political judgment on the part of the Prime Minister and the cabinet, Rishi Sunak and the rest of the cabinet, to say whether this will go through or not.
You're talking about the FTA with India, the free trade agreement with
FTA with India, with India. And yes, there have been overstayers, the numbers of which vary. Theresa May at one time gave the figure at 80,000. And now we're talking about 10,000. Yes, there is a problem. And I think the government of India is very clear on this, that if you can demonstrate, because most people destroy their passports.
Mhm.
You know that there's a certain way in which it's done.
So you drop coffee on the passport or something, and
You just destroy the passport. Because once you can identify someone's passport, but there are other ways, biometrics and all that, which is available now.
Okay.
Technology has come today. But India has always been very clear that if you can demonstrate that someone is an Indian, is a bona fide Indian passport holder, and is an overstayer, we are completely willing to take them back.
So, John,
There's no question. So it's not a government of India issue. It's not a government to government problem. It's a problem of individuals who decide to chance their luck, and most of them happen.
So it is a government of India to government.
It's not a government issue.
It is, because the free trade agreement is on hold.
No, the free trade agreement does not mean that there's free movement of people. Free trade is free trade.
Isn't that the quid pro quo, John?
No,
free movement of people.
There is no.
So,
as far as I know, there is no free movement of people.
I mean, as I understand it, on the one hand, India wants to have better access for students and for high-skilled workers to come into Britain, and that's what Braverman appeared to be objecting to. On the other hand, Britain is saying to India, please take back more of these overstayers. And the overstayers is a long problem. I mean, I remember hearing from officials in the British High Commission in Delhi about people from Punjab going to Britain for phony marriages and staying on and throwing their passports away. It's been around for years. But it does appear that and I'm not an expert on this, but it does appear that the officials in both countries have not been able to connect with each other effectively on this overstayers problem. With India saying, hey, don't try and send non-Indians back to us, and Britain saying, well, come on, get on and make the procedures work. So you need a understanding Home Secretary, which we've not got, and you also need good officials handling it. And there is now in London a new, very energetic High Commissioner who is trying to solve another problem, which is the fact that it's been almost impossible for the last few months to get a visa to visit India. A huge backlog, everything shutting down. So your new High Commissioner has hit the ground running 2 or 3 weeks ago and really seems to be trying to solve those visa problems. And hopefully he will manage to move on and solve some of these other problems too.
So the last question to both of you, will Rishi Sunak, the son of immigrants, is he likely to be more sympathetic or lend a more sympathetic ear to these immigration issues or to the overstayer issue? Could this be a make or break problem between the India-UK relationship? Swapan?
No, I don't think he's going to be. I think he's going to be very defensive on that, because if he's seen to be sympathetic, it's going to rebound on him. He's going to be certainly very sympathetic to India, and he's going to be very sympathetic on trade matters, on commercial matters. But on this question, limited question, he's even going to be very sympathetic on the student issues, where there's a big pressure from the universities to accommodate more Indian students. So Braverman will find herself in a small minority as far as that is concerned. But on the question of granting amnesty or something like that, I fear no. Sunak will be terribly conscious that anything he does which appears to be generous is going to be attributed to his ethnicity. So I think he's going to be very, very cautious in doing that, and I think he's going to take a very collegiate view on that subject. He's not going to do anything on his own initiative.
John, you have the last word.
Yeah, I agree with Swapan. He has said, in fact, that that he wants to make it easier for British students to travel to India to study, and he also wants to make it easier for British companies to go to India. So he will take a strongly British line, but he will understand. He'll have some sympathy, some empathy for the problem of immigrants coming in. But as Swapan says, he'll have to be careful. But let's go back to where we started. He is a technocrat. His job is to run the country efficiently, and I think in that Britain has got a sound prime minister.
I agree. I think I think after a long time, the Conservative MPs applied their minds and applied it quite intelligently.
And he's got the majority of those MPs backing him. That's the important thing.
Yeah.
He may not have the whole of the Conservative Party, but he hasn't got the whole of the Conservative Party across the country. But he has got the majority of the MPs in the
I will miss the presence of Mr. Rees-Mogg.
Well, but John, to your point of the Conservative Party backing him, the fact also is that a lot of people are saying that he's an unelected prime minister.
Of course, he's bound to be unelected if you're going to change prime ministers midstream.
Yeah,
but James Callaghan was unelected.
John,
but the electorate elected those MPs in the last general election, and those MPs have elected Rishi Sunak. So there is a constitution. We haven't got a written constitution, but there is a constitutional flow there. With Truss, the MPs did not back her to be the prime minister. They went 2-1 in favour of Sunak, and then the members, 60,000 of them or whatever it was, voted for Liz Truss. She was definitely not constitutionally valid. Rishi Sunak is. And that gives him strength. He has the support of, he may not have support of all the ministers. There will be people who back Boris. The Conservative Party is undoubtedly divided. There are people who back Truss. There are people who back Boris. But he's absorbed those into his cabinet. We haven't got round to the other cabinet members, but he has given jobs to people, including the Foreign Secretary, to people who have been loyal to those previous prime ministers. He's tried to cover the broad frontier. That may mean one or two people shouldn't be in their current jobs, but it's practical politics. He's got the support of the MPs, and I think he's got a good chance.
Well, perhaps
he's got to last 2 years, more than two. He's got to last 2 years till the next general election. Whether he will then be able to campaign around the country and win another election is a different issue. But let's hope, for the sake of stable politics, a stable economy, politics aside, that he stays in power for 2 years.
Well, perhaps one of the reasons that he has the support of his MPs is because nobody wants an election. Nobody wants to go back to the electorate. But I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much, John Elliott, talking to us from a camp in the heart of Madhya Pradesh, and Swapan Dasgupta talking to us from Kolkata. Thank you again for joining me on the Print Debates.
Bye-bye. Thanks. It's been good fun. Thank you.